Hannah here from Bear's Den Essentials. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to create a nice two-color pom-pom that creates the perfect topper for your hand-knit beanie. So for those of you who came to this tutorial from the pattern that I just put out on the brown trout beanie, this is the tutorial on how to add that final finishing touch. For those of you who are just here to learn how to make a pom-pom, awesome. If you have any interest in creating this pattern as well, you can go to our website, which is at bearsdenessentials.com, and you can find the PDF of that pattern available there. You can also find it on our Ravelry page, which is Hannah-Bearsden, as well as on our Etsy page and the Clover USA blog. So let's get started. So everything you see here is what you need to create a pom-pom. So what I'm using is the Clover large size pom-pom maker. And this thing is kind of funky and cool. Honestly, I used to make them by hand using just my fingers. And this really creates a much more beautiful aesthetic, in my humble opinion. So you have these two semicircles here, and you want to close one side just to make your life a little bit easier. And you want to make sure that the two halves of the other semicircle are aligned with each other. Once you've flipped open one side, either side is fine, it doesn't matter. You'll take the ends of two strands to get started. And this is true whether you're making a multicolor pom-pom or just a single color one. I like to use two strands. One, because I think it's more efficient, and two, as you'll see, I like a really dense pom-pom that's even, and I think using two strands is the best way to start with that. So this requires a little bit of dexterity. I like to use my non-dominant hand, so I'm a righty, and I like to hold the ends of the two threads and start wrapping. So for the first wrap, I actually overlap twice just to secure those two threads. And you see how this half is popped up? I just close it back so that it's even. Otherwise, you're going to create some problems for yourself. I use my right hand, which is my dominant hand, to control the two strands that I'm now going to be wrapping around. And my non-dominant hand is what I use to push back the yarn. And so now I catch the ends one more time, but you'll see that I'm no longer overlapping as I start to go. So got to be a little bit more careful. Now I really focus on wrapping both strands flat. It's okay if you see the yarn twist a little bit, that's not a big deal. I just want a single layer. And so now that I've done a few wraps, I use my non-dominant hand to push it back, and I keep it pretty tight, my wraps, because again, as I mentioned, I like a really dense pom-pom. So I continue to wrap all the way across the semicircle, stopping occasionally to push the strands back with my left hand, or my right hand occasionally too. So pushing back, continuing to try to keep it nice and even so that I'm only doing one layer. If I went like that, it would actually result in a very uneven and not cylindrical and non-cylindrical pom-pom. So push it back. Oop, there we go. I'm not used to doing this on the table, as you can tell, so it's creating a bit more of a mess than usual. I don't know about you, but if you have a nice big wooden coffee table, it kind of becomes the place for everything. So I've done about, there we go. I've finished the first row, and I can squeeze one more in, I think. So one more wrap in, nice single layer. It's pretty tight. Some people will actually cut the pom-pom and leave it there. I am a fan of a thick, dense pom-pom, and so I do a couple more rows. So now you start to go back and create a nice even layer going the other direction. And it's okay to be a little less perfect here because you're going to round the corner and it's kind of impossible not to have a little bit of overlap here in the center. So I still try not to do it on the outside because that is where the evenness is going to be the most noticeable. Oop. Unravel a couple more yarn. I should be pulling from the center of the cakes, but I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't feel like rewinding them today, so I've just been drawing from the outside, but I am a pull from the center kind of gal when I'm knitting and making pom-poms usually. So I've done 2 rows across. Controversial opinion, I'm gonna do a 3rd row. Some people are like, that's too many. Some people might be like, that's not enough. I am in the latter camp typically. So going back across, and so you'll see that it's really, this is where I'm actually going to do one last one. So 1/4 round. Oh, my scissors are getting caught. And it's a little less perfect. And some people do a 5th one. I can show you what that looks like. So I'll go 5th time around. You'll notice it's a lot fewer wraps at this point. And then the biggest thing towards the end, actually I'm going to cover that one. And when I'm getting close to the end, I just look for gaps to make it nice and even. So that's a pretty evenly wrapped, and it's going to make a nice dense pom-pom. So you want to cut the strand when you finish in a way that's going to allow you to tuck the ends under. So you put your semicircle back down and you don't want the ends sticking out and having it start to unravel. So this is where you have to be a little more careful because you're going to do the same thing on the other side, but you don't want to push these 2 hooks up because if you do, all of that work is going to unravel. And this is especially important when you start to cut along the semicircle. You have to be very careful, and you don't want to ever pull this apart until you're done because like I said, it's going to be yarn everywhere and no one likes to spend their knitting time rewinding their yarn. And if you do props, I would love to know who you are because I would hire you to wind up my yarn just to save me time. You hear my dog groaning in the background. She's watching this tutorial that I'm filming and she is very uninterested in it. She would much rather me be paying attention to her. So again, I start up on the inside and I work my way to the outside. It doesn't really matter, it's just a preference thing. It feels like it's easier for me to hold the pom-pom maker in my hand and have some control over it, as opposed to if I'm just holding this side in my non-dominant hand. I am not ambidextrous, sadly. So I do the first overlap and I'll catch the bottoms of those threads. And good. And you want it to be, oh, I see one more spot. You want it to be about the same length. This one's a little chunky right here, but I'll neaten that up when I trim it. But you want it to be about the same thickness. Otherwise, you're gonna have a pom-pom that's like really dense on one side and on the other is just sort of undernourished looking. Again, cut it about here, make it nice and secure. So then before I cut here, I like to do about 1.5 feet of 2 strands and have that ready for when it's time to tie. So here's the moment of truth. You see this area? This is where you're going to be cutting. So you want to make sure when you stick your scissors in, you want to catch underneath that first row of yarn that you did the layer of. Because if you only go part of the way in, you're still going to have to go and do another cut. So you want to catch all of the layers of yarn when you stick your needle in. It's kind of hard to see, but you basically take your scissors until you feel that bottom layer, and you want really nice scissors. I like the Singer ones. So I made the first cut, and you can see that I caught all the layers. You need to be really careful not to knock these two tabs up again, because otherwise now you're gonna have basically confetti everywhere. So you cut all the way along. I like to keep my thumb pressed on this to keep everything secured when I'm cutting. And then you go right through to the second semicircle. And I actually hold it like this because that keeps the two semicircles down. And then once I'm about here, I put my hands like that to keep everything secure. You have to find the right holding position that works for you. This is just what I found that prevents any sort of chaos. So this is kind of your awesome pom-pom that's about to take shape. Now, this is where your two strands are going to come into play. So carefully, you see you want to put it right along that crease. Make sure you go all the way around evenly. And then you're going to start to pull it in so it actually somewhat begins to separate the two halves. So now once you've got it nice and secure in all the way around, you tie the bottom together. So I'm a double knotter, so you do it nice and tight. Don't pull too tight because you can break the yarn and then you're back at square one, and that's never fun. So second knot, and then I actually turn the pom-pom maker upside down and I pull the strands through to do a double knot on this side. Some people will just use one strand of yarn, and you'll see when I secure this onto the hat why I like to use two. So now it's for the grand reveal of the pom-pom. You pull these two up. There might be a little bit of resistance, so be careful. This is a plastic object. You don't want to break it. I've had this for years and years and years, so if you take good care of it, it'll last. And then the final step, let's actually take it apart. You put it back together really quick, and you store it for your next pom-pom. So, woohoo! Because I make mine thick, they tend to be a little funky shaped, a little bit more like a football. So now here's where the trimming comes into play. But look how nice and thick they are. It's such a good base. I love it. So I'd rather have to do some trimming personally. So I actually trim my pom-poms twice. Once when I get them off the pom-pom maker, and then again once I've attached them to the hat, because I like to make sure they really sit perfectly cylindrical on the top of the hats when I send them out. So really easy to get picky and OCD when you're doing a pom-pom, that's for sure. It's really easy to get very, very particular when you're making a pom-pom. When I was in grad school, I had a professor who gave me very useful advice, which is don't let perfection be the enemy of great. And I feel like that's very true. You want something that looks good and that you can feel proud of, and that your customer or your gift recipient or yourself is going to be proud to wear. But see, quick trim. But you also don't want to go crazy. So this side's a little thick. I know if you do fewer wraps, you don't run into this issue that I have here of having to do as much trimming, but I think the trade-off is worth it because I love how nice and thick this is. There was definitely one time where I made a pom-pom where I was busy attaching the pom-pom to my hat, and my dog walked along and she sneezed all of this right onto our shaggy carpet, which, as you can imagine, was not that fun to try to clean up. Alrighty, so I'd say it's coming along pretty good. Now, again, I'm getting very picky about how perfectly cylindrical that is, but I think ultimately it's worth it when you spend a little bit of extra time trimming it neatly, because it's just gonna look so cute on top of the hat. So speaking of mess, I'm gonna clean this up. I'm gonna use these to creatively get the yarn fuzzies out of the way. I'll use the vacuum to get the rest. This is our assistant, Posy. When I do all my knitting for production, she is not allowed anywhere near my area where I'm working, and that does not make her happy because she is a very spoiled but very good girl. So, okay. So you have 4 strands, and you'll see why I did this in just a second. So take the waste yarn off my jumbo darning needle. Again, I like the jumbo darning needles that have the hook to them. I find them useful. And then you just thread one of the 4 strands through. And I only do one at a time for a reason. I don't like a very wobbly pom-pom, so you see how I'm organizing the 4 strands into the four different cardinal directions. Technically that way is north, so, but you get the idea. Each of our hats has a 4-corner decrease. So you can see there's 1 quadrant, 2 quadrants, 3 quadrants, 4 quadrants. I like to align where I put the pom-pom with 1 in each of the 4 quadrants, because then I can make a nice secure attachment to the pom-pom that doesn't warp the top of the hat. So I insert it about 1 inch away, and I like to do it, and this is all eyeballing, in roughly the center. It creates a way of attaching your pom-pom in a way that makes the pom-pom centered, but also less wobbly, but it's not going to screw up the top of your hat. So then I take a strand and I insert it on the opposite side of that first strand. You go from the outside in, equidistant away, roughly is fine. And I use my fingers on my non-dominant hand to just make sure that the strands don't get pulled back out again while I'm working. It's okay to leave a little space right here. And then the 3rd quadrant, making sure it's about the same distance. That looks good. And if it's not perfectly balanced, I actually have a trick at the end that I'll show you to make sure that your pom-pom sits squarely on the top. So final strand, holding, now once I insert the 4th one, I actually hold all 3 on the inside just to make sure it's not gonna fall out at the end. So insert it in, pull that tight. And you can already see that it's creating a nice securely attached pom-pom. And now you flip the hat inside out. I sometimes think the inside of the hat looks just as cool as the outside. Here's the inside of the Fair Isle on the brown trout hat, which I found super cool. Maybe I should design an inside out beanie at some point. So This one was actually knitted up on our knitting machine. We have a pattern for both hand and machine knitter. So this one was done by hand and this one was done by machine, which is why the ribbing looks just slightly different. It's a 2x2 rib on both, but the machine creates a different detail look. So I have the 4 strands, and this is just as simple as creating a nice double knot. So tie it nice and securely. And because we make our beanies slouchy, you don't have to worry about this little knot hitting the top of your head. You're gonna have plenty of room and it's not gonna be noticeable. So when you flip it back right side out, you see that there's definitely some neatening of the pom-pom that I want to do, but it looks like it's really, really close to being done. And you can also see that it's not too wobbly. So if you don't attach it securely, what you get is kind of, to use Phoebe Buffay's word, a floopy pom-pom. And I personally can't stand when it's just sort of wiggling, is the best way I can put it. So this is a good way to tie it that makes it nice and secure. If you're selling this kind of a thing and you want to make sure it's extra secure, there is something else you can do. And if you find that it's not on there evenly, like your quadrants, you didn't put them in quite evenly, this is actually a way to straighten it out as well that I found. And so this is an extra securing technique. So what you do is you just insert the needle from the inside out and you run it through the base of the pom-pom. And you pull it through, and you use 2 strands for this one. And then you go in the opposite direction with the other 2 strands. And you have to be careful not to pull the other strands that you just wove through back out. So it can be a little stiff to get through, but here you go. So you take the needle off, and then you just double knot it one more time. So now you really have a pom-pom that's not going anywhere. And again, you can hide any trace of it by trimming the yarn nice and close. And so you just have a little bow right in the center, which people are gonna be so dazzled by this part of the inside that they won't even notice. And something I should point out, what's cool about this pattern is that, so now it's just the final touches that you want to spend a little time neatening up. So I always take a look, I do this and that with the pom-pom just to see what it's gonna look like if somebody had it in like a mailing envelope and it's arrived smushed like that. I've heard of people using their hair dryer. I like to fiddle around with it just to see if there's any stray strands that are gonna pop out in a way that looks not aesthetically pleasing. So I see what I need to trim up and neaten up. Awesome, it's looking pretty good. Move that out of the way, out of sight, out of mind for now, and voila. So there you have it. That's how you make a pom-pom that attaches nice and securely to the top of your hat. I just love this look on the top of hats. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I hope that you like and subscribe if you found this video useful. And if you have specific requests for tutorials in the future, please let me know. You can always send us an email at bearsdenessentials@gmail.com. Thanks. Happy knitting.